In medieval Europe, pregnancy wasn't just a stage of life. It was a test of faith, endurance, and sheer luck. It blended hope with fear, joy with danger, and for many women, it became a 9-month battle for survival. Imagine this. You're living in a small village in the 11th century. The smell of wood smoke and livestock fills the air. The muddy streets are crowded with carts and chickens and medicine. Well, it's closer to witchcraft than science. In that world, discovering you're pregnant wasn't necessarily good news. It was a gamble with death. Pregnancy back then wasn't a beautiful, glowing journey. It was a moment of both celebration and dread, where every heartbeat carried the echo of mortality. Small blue diamond, the discovery. Confirming a pregnancy in the Middle Ages was no simple task. There were no pharmacy tests, no doctors, no ultrasounds. Women relied entirely on their bodies and intuition. A missed period was the most obvious clue, but malnutrition often caused irregular cycles even without pregnancy. Other signs, nausea, fatigue, and a swelling belly, took weeks or months to appear. And when they did, no one could be sure whether it meant new life or just a stomach full of barley porridge. That's when the midwives stepped in. These women were the heart of medieval maternity, part healer, part astrologer, part priestess. They would press the belly, study the color of the urine, and sometimes, believe it or not, consult the stars. Yes, the stars. Because in the Middle Ages, astrology wasn't a hobby, it was medicine. Some midwives carried small star charts to predict the baby's gender, or even whether the mother would survive the birth. Of course, their accuracy was about as reliable as predicting the weather by watching a crow fly. Small blue diamond, hope and fear. Once pregnancy was confirmed, emotions were mixed. A child was a blessing, yes, especially a boy, but it also meant another mouth to feed and another life hanging by a thread. For peasant families, children were both the future workforce and their only retirement plan. But for the mothers, it was a death sentence waiting to be written. Maternal mortality was brutal. Historians estimate that 1 in 5 women didn't survive childbirth or the weeks that followed. Even for those who did, infections, hemorrhages, or complications could strike at any time. In short, giving birth in the Middle Ages was like walking a tightrope over a pit of graves, with no safety net below. Small blue diamond, the daily struggle. Nutrition was another silent killer. If you were a peasant woman, your diet depended entirely on the harvest. Rye bread, porridge, turnips, and cabbage, maybe some meat or fish on feast days if you were lucky. The bread, often mixed with weeds or bran, could irritate the stomach and worsen morning sickness. Noble women had more variety, fruits, roasted meats, wine, but even they weren't safe from malnutrition. Vitamins didn't exist as a concept, and scurvy or anemia were common. Medical texts of the time, still based on the ancient theories of Hippocrates and Galen, claimed the body's humors needed balancing. Pregnant women were advised to eat warm and moist foods, spice soups, or herbal infusions. But those herbs often caused more harm than help. Parsley and juniper, used to strengthen the womb, could cause miscarriages if consumed in excess. No one knew, because toxicology didn't exist yet, and superstition ruled. Some believed that eating rabbit or hare during pregnancy would make the baby deformed. So even rare sources of protein were avoided out of fear. Small blue diamond, medicine or madness. The line between medicine and magic was razor thin. Pregnant women were told to wear coral amulets to protect the baby, to drink potions made of hare's blood or powdered toad ash, and to pray while burning herbs at midnight to ward off evil spirits. Yes, toad ashes. Because in a world without science, desperation became medicine. Many of these remedies were not only useless, they were deadly. Mercury and lead appeared in countless cures. And when pain or infection struck, there were no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no help beyond prayer. Midwives mixed herbs, whispered prayers, and called upon saints, because religion filled the gaps that medicine could not. If a woman suffered complications, it wasn't seen as biology. It was a divine punishment or a curse. Churches held special masses to cleanse the womb and drive away evil spirits. Some women even underwent exorcisms when pain became unbearable. And yet, somehow many survived. Through strength, instinct, and sheer will, medieval women endured, turning every pregnancy into an act of faith and defiance against nature itself. Daily life for a pregnant woman in the Middle Ages was a test of endurance and quiet suffering. Rest was a luxury that few could afford. Imagine being 7 months pregnant, your back stiff, your ankle swollen, and your belly heavy, yet the fields still need to be harvested, the animals fed, and the children bathed. There was no such thing as maternity leave. Pregnancy was not an excuse to stop working. It was simply another burden to carry. Peasant women labored until the very end, bending over crops, grinding grain, hauling buckets of water, or walking miles to the nearest market. Every step was a reminder that their bodies were no longer entirely their own. Each day of hard labor could trigger early contractions or dangerous complications, but necessity left no choice. If a mother stopped working, the family might not survive the winter. Small blue diamond work, risk, and resilience. The village itself was both a cradle and a curse. Pregnant women joined communal tasks like brewing ale or gathering herbs, activities that seemed harmless but carried silent dangers. Spoiled ingredients, slippery floors, or toxic fumes could turn a simple chore into a tragedy. And, without proper medical knowledge, even minor injuries could become deadly infections. But in these same communities, women found strength. They shared stories, laughter, and advice, passing down the wisdom of generations through whispers and rituals. Each birth, successful or not, added another thread to the fabric of their shared survival. Small blue diamond, the noblewoman's prison. And while peasant women fought the earth, noble women fought expectations. For them, the body wasn't their own either. It belonged to politics. A noblewoman's duty was to produce heirs, not just children. Failure meant shame, gossip, or the collapse of alliances. In the later months of pregnancy, these women were often confined to their chambers, a custom called lying in. The intention was to protect them from illness or bad omens. In reality, it was an elegant kind of imprisonment. Their rooms were sealed with thick curtains to keep out the evil air. Candles flickered dimly through the haze of incense meant to purify the space. Every piece of furniture, from the bed to the pillows, was blessed. It was a ritual of control disguised as care. Surrounded by midwives, servants, and prayers, noble women waited, sometimes for months, in stifling silence. No sunlight, no freedom, only embroidery, murmured prayers, and a gnawing fear that something could go wrong at any moment. Small blue diamond pain without remedy. When pain struck, there was no mercy. The concept of pain relief was almost non-existent. Chamomile tea, lavender oil, or elderflower might have offered mild comfort, but no true relief. A mother's only anesthetic was faith. Some midwives whispered charms while rubbing oil into swollen ankles. Others placed relics under pillows, hoping divine power could ease contractions. But for most women, pain was simply part of the process, a trial of both body and soul. If a woman miscarried, she often faced more than grief. She faced blame. Communities saw miscarriage as a sign of sin, impurity, or witchcraft. Whispers spread quickly. She angered God. She was cursed. The emotional toll was unbearable, compounded by isolation and guilt. Small blue diamond superstition as medicine. To guard against misfortune, superstition became its own kind of therapy. Midwives tied protective belts around women's bellies, strips of leather or fabric with symbolic knots. Each knot represented a prayer, a promise to a saint, or a plea to God. Priests blessed these belts with holy water, believing they carried divine power. Others wore small pouches filled with salt, herbs, or relics of saints, charms to keep away the evil eye. And they clung to endless lists of forbidden foods and rituals. No cheese, it cools the womb. No rabbit, it marks the child. No anger, it poisons the soul. A mother's emotions, they believed, could shape her child's fate. If she looked upon something ugly, her baby might be born deformed. If she cursed in anger, her child's soul might carry that darkness forever. Every thought, every meal, every feeling became a potential threat. Small blue diamond faith as shield. Religion filled every gap that science left open. Women prayed to Saint Margaret, protector of mothers, clutching medallions or wearing ribbons blessed by monks. For the poor, these relics were scraps of hope. For the rich, they were fashion accessories draped in fear. But faith could also weigh heavy. Confession was mandatory. Priests warned that unrepented sins could block a birth or invite God's wrath. And if a baby died before baptism, the mother's sorrow was doubled by the terror of limbo, the eternal waiting room of unbaptized souls. Still, faith gave women something the world could not: a sense of control in a universe ruled by chance. For a brief moment, a whispered prayer felt like power. Small blue diamond, the armor of daily life. Even the clothes they wore told stories of struggle. With no elastic fabrics, every outfit had to be adjusted by hand. Peasant women loosened belts and aprons. Noble women layered tunics with cords that strained against swelling bellies. Movement was clumsy, and breathing was hard. Jewelry became armor, rings inscribed with verses, brooches adorned with protective stones. Each piece carried meaning: protection, fertility, survival. Even a simple wooden cross hung over the chest felt like a barrier between life and death. At last, the 9th month arrived, a time of both hope and dread. For medieval women, childbirth wasn't the beginning of life. It was a confrontation with death. There were no hospitals, no sterile rooms, no doctors with clean hands. Birth took place in what they called the birthing chamber, a small, closed, candlelit space that was meant to protect the mother, but often sealed her fate. The air inside was thick, a mix of smoke, sweat, incense, and fear. The chamber was kept hot, sometimes unbearably so, because heat was believed to soften the body. The windows were shut tight to keep out bad spirits, and the room was filled with holy icons, herbs, and whispered prayers. Small blue diamond, the midwives' domain. When labor began, the woman was never alone, but she was never truly safe either. Midwives, the guardians of life, took charge. They came armed with towels, oils, amulets, and experience, but no real medicine. Their tools were simple: knives, ropes, bits of wood, and faith. They massaged the belly with warm fat, tied belts around the waist, and prayed aloud as contractions grew violent. Sometimes they placed relics under the bed or painted crosses on the walls with holy water. Every action had a purpose and a superstition. The woman screamed, her body shaking. There was no anesthesia, no comfort except the midwife's voice and the faint hum of prayers. Each cry echoed through the chamber like a plea to heaven. If the birth went smoothly, it was a miracle. If not, if the baby was stuck, if the bleeding wouldn't stop, there was nothing anyone could do. Many midwives whispered, "God decides now." Small blue diamond, between life and death. The line between life and death blurred easily. A single infection could turn triumph into tragedy. There were no antibiotics, no blood transfusions, only herbs, vinegar, and hope. Women bled out in minutes. Others slipped into fever days later, a cruel condition we now call puerperal sepsis. In some villages, if the mother was dying but the baby was still alive inside, midwives faced an impossible choice. They performed crude emergency deliveries with knives or hooks, desperate to save at least one life. Sometimes neither survived. To the medieval mind, every complication was more than bad luck. It was a sign, a punishment for pride, a curse cast by envy, or the will of God written in pain. Small blue diamond rituals of protection. Before, during, and after labor, rituals surrounded the mother like armor. A candle blessed by a priest burned beside her bed, its flames symbolizing the baby's soul. Holy water was sprinkled across the sheets to keep demons away. If the birth grew difficult, family members recited psalms or laid relics on the woman's chest. When the child finally emerged, crying, silent, or still, the first concern wasn't the mother. It was baptism. If the baby showed even a flicker of life, a priest was called immediately. A few drops of water, a quick prayer, because dying unbaptized meant eternal limbo. Only after that did anyone look at the mother. Exhausted, pale, trembling. Sometimes alive. Sometimes gone. Small blue diamond, the aftermath. For those who survived, recovery was slow and uncertain. Fevers, infections, and hemorrhages took countless lives in the days after delivery. The survivors often carried lifelong pain, torn muscles, chronic infections, infertility. But there was no language for trauma. No counseling, no rest. Just work, waiting to be done. The next morning, she might rise to feed her family, as if bringing life into the world had been just another chore on the endless list of survival. In noble houses, the birth of a boy was celebrated with banquets and bells. The mother smiled through her weakness, surrounded by congratulations and expectations for the next heir. But among the poor, celebration was quieter. A few tears, a whisper of gratitude, and a deep exhale of relief. For a brief moment, the world stopped. The cries of the newborn cut through the silence of fear. Life had won, at least this time. Small blue diamond, a legacy of courage. We often imagine the Middle Ages as dark and cruel, and in many ways they were. But behind those centuries of superstition and pain were women whose strength shaped history. Women who carried life through fire and fear. Their courage built families, villages, generations. Every birth that succeeded was a miracle. Every heartbeat that continued was an act of defiance against death itself. So the next time you think of a medieval mother, don't picture weakness or tragedy. Picture resilience. Picture faith. Picture a woman holding her child under the dim light of a single candle. Alive, trembling, whispering a prayer of thanks into the cold night. Backhand index pointing right.